Hello, everyone. Thank you again for showing up. So tonight, we're going to finish off the story of Noah and also the story of the Tower of Babel. And I don't think that'll take very long. And then we're going to turn to the Abrahamic stories. And they're a very complex set of stories. They sit between the earliest stories in Genesis that I would say end with the Tower of Babel, and then the stories of Moses, which are extraordinarily well developed. The Abrahamic stories, there's a whole sequence of them, multiple stories conjoined together, and I found them very daunting. They're very difficult to understand. And so I'm going to stumble through them the best that I can, I would say. That's probably the best way to think about this, because they have a narrative content that's quite strange. I was reading a book while doing this called The Disappearance of God that I found quite helpful. And the author of that book argues that one of the things that happens in the Old Testament is that God is very manifest at the beginning, in terms of personal appearances even. And then that proclivity fades away as the Old Testament develops. And there's a parallel development that's maybe causally linked. I'm not exactly sure how to conceptualize it, but it appears to be causally linked, is that the stories about individuals become more and more well developed. So it's as if as God fades away, so to speak, the individual becomes more and more manifest. And there's a statement in the Old Testament, the location of which I don't recall, but I'll tell you about it in future lectures, where God essentially tells whoever he's speaking with, and I don't remember who that is, that he's going to disappear and let man essentially go his own way and see what happens. Not a complete disappearance, but maybe a transformation into something that modern people regard more as a psychological phenomena rather than the sort of objective entity that God seems to be in the beginning of the biblical stories. And so I've been wrestling with that a lot, because the notion that God appears to Abraham multiple times, and that's not a concept that's easy for modern people to grasp. For us, generally speaking, apart from, say, issues of faith, God isn't someone who makes himself personally manifest in our lives. He doesn't appear to us. That's, I suppose, why the question of belief is so paramount for modern people. I presume that if God was in the habit of appearing to you, you likely wouldn't have a problem with belief. I mean, it might be more complicated than that, but that's how it seems to me. And so when we read stories about God making himself manifest, either to a nation, say in the case of Israel, or to individuals, it's not easy to understand. It's not easy to understand why people would write stories like that if they thought like we thought. And I mean, really, it wasn't that long ago that the Bible was written, say from a biological perspective. It's really only yesterday. It's a couple of thousand years, say 4,000 years, something like that. That's not very long ago. From a biological perspective, it's nothing. So the first thing I tried to do was to see if I could figure out how to understand that. And so I'll start the lecture once we finish the remains of the story of Noah. I'll start the lecture with an attempt to situate the Abrahamic stories in a context that might make them more accessible, at least a context that worked for me to make them more accessible.